Hi. Boom.
Hi,
Hello,
Marcus.
Mark. Hey, Mark. You know, I'm gonna come up with some intro music. It was a nice calm leading into it, but bit by bit, we're getting there. We're getting
That
there.
would be nice. Yes, music always nice to set the tone.
Yeah, the vibrations. Actually, I sent you a few, right? And
Yes.
yeah, ain't until but just to do it now. How are
Yeah,
you doing this week, sir?
I'm doing great.
Hi, Marcus. Yeah. Myself as well. Let's jump right into it, right?
Yeah,
Let's do what we're
let's
gonna
do it.
look at.
Chapter 4.
Let's actually hold on. I'm gonna pause. You showed me something that you received in the mail this week in our pre-conversation. Can you share it with the audience, please? All right, what is this?
There it is. The live
Hey.
physical copy turned out beautiful. It's an author's
Mm,
copy, so it's not yet available on the market, but I have a whole bunch here, and I'm very happy to share it with anybody who would like to have an advanced copy. But
boom.
really happy how it turned out, Marcus. Looks great. Looks really great.
Hey, I am. Yeah, I'm excited to see that. I'm excited to get my copy here in the States. And soon we'll have a digital link for people to read along with us. And bit by bit, we're on chapter 4 now of our 23 chapters. And there's still more editing to go, right? Yeah.
There's always more editing to go.
I remember writing a poem, or I heard it on a stage in Miami. This woman said, "We never finish our poems, we merely abandon them."
Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
I get the sentiment. I get what she's saying. And just like with our kids, right? We never finish our kids. We just merely let them off into the world.
Yeah. And I think it's very similar to the process of writing a book. There's times where the inspiration is flowing and all the ideas is there and it gets captured. And then there's a moment to come out and share it. And when, and that then sort of brings in new inspiration again that leads to, another version of it or an update or an evolution of it. So I do feel it's a living piece of art, or a living, work in progress, like we all are. But I think this story as well, it has a
Yeah.
lot of life still in it, you know?
Very
Yeah.
much so. Uh, and again, noting a classic writes something to the conversation of the time, which we did, as well as capturing something that is essentially human, which we did. Talking about human development as well as education and AI in the current stage. Yeah. Boom. Well, today we're looking at chapter 4, Old Ideas with a New Perspective. And our discussion goals, we're going to talk about how to challenge thinking without losing balance, and then discovering practical ways to make mistakes a valuable part of our learning experience. You posted on LinkedIn something to that effect this week. We'll explore that.
Mm,
And yeah, reframing our failures in education and in life. All right.
mm,
Let me just read real quickly to set the context. There's no
mhm.
meaning without context. So, well, actually, to put you on the spot, could you tell us a bit about what happened last chapter before we come into this one?
Sure. So last chapter was all about Professor Amar, and
Hmm.
we got to know him a little bit. We got to see that he's a bit of a change agent within the university context, somebody with innovative ideas, somebody who challenges, is not afraid to challenge the status quo. And he's seen by his colleagues as a little bit of a, uh, yeah, sort of, he might be a bit difficult or challenging. Um, and that was Professor, what was his name, Professor Hendricks, who came in while he was preparing for his this first teaching session, and
Hmm.
really told him, like, I hope you just stick to the curriculum. And he answered, quite a diplomatic way, saying, yeah, yeah, we'll definitely cover the curriculum, and also find a nice balance of bringing in innovation and new thinking. So I think he's
Hmm.
somebody who knows how to work within the system, but at the same time, maybe the system perceives him a bit as a threat as well. So we got a glimpse into who Amar is, young, dynamic, bringing lots of new ideas and inspiration. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So we started with Kenna with the power or the cost of not speaking up, Amar with the cost of speaking up. And now we're going to see where these two are going to meet. They're both protagonists in their own sense. We follow Kenna. This is Kenna's story, but we also follow Amar as he progresses. And now, what happens in this chapter, Old Ideas with a New Perspective, Kenna Patel actually comes into the macroeconomics class. Um, he's coming there wanting to look at bigger ideas, but he's already gotten into a rut.
Mm.
And when we say a rut, he's gotten into the complacency of what university life can be. Here go some notable quotes. His disillusionment with the education system. Um, He endured the familiar rhythm of academic monotony. Wake up, grab coffee, drag through class. Try not to doze off as the professor rambles on about abstract concepts that seem to have little bearing on his real world.
Mm.
Um, we've all been there, as well as I think we're entering into a new paradigm of education. This is something that the students question during the conversation that they're having back and forth because Professor Amar then he writes something on the board and he presents this idea that greatness lies not in what you know, but in your ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn. And
Yeah.
we see how he starts to open up the students by first inviting them to the conversation in what they know, and then he starts to share new perspectives about it. And it happens very organically, and they start to see who this professor is, and he's starting to work with them. Um, and then we'll talk about yeah, how he presents. There's a possibility beyond this of how to think about economics. Before we go on, is there anything you want to share there, Mark?
Yeah, when I was rereading the chapter, there's something that stood out when
Okay.
he was engaging the class and sort of trying to get up to speed, like, hey, what have you learned so far? And there was silence, like everyone was looking at him like, what are you doing? Just teach, right? Tell us the material. They're not used to this interactive space. And what stood out to me, which I think is quite significant, is that he was able to hold that silence. There was something about his presence that was able to hold the silence, be there, and reframe the question, hold the silence again. And it's in that pause, that deliberate pause, that you give permission to somebody to then speak up. And once, what I found really beautiful is once one person spoke up, all of a sudden the conversation started to flow, and the dynamic and the energy in that lecture hall completely shifted from a one-way conversation to now there's a dialogue that was happening. And I think there was something in Professor Amar's presence and his ability to hold that discomfort, the discomfort of the silence a little bit longer than you normally would, and that somehow was an important trigger, I feel.
Yeah. To extend that idea from the student's perspective, because this is a real life experience. Like I've had this happen a few times as I'm entering into a new learning space. And I remember one particular time I invited the learners to answer, and this was in Spain. And one kid raised his hand and he said an answer that was close, but it wasn't exactly it. We were looking at the vocabulary word oscillate, and he thought it was isolate, and he explained it. And I said close, but that's not quite it. And I high fived him. And then another student raised his hand. He said, but he got it wrong. And I said, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I said, there's 16 of us. 16 of us got it wrong. He's the closest one to learning about what it is. I high fived him again. And that's the whole idea. Well, two things. One, you praise effort.
Mm.
And the second thing is, I'm not looking for right or wrong. I'm looking for progress. And
Mm.
sometimes students don't answer up in traditional education because it's like, will I get it wrong? It's like, no, 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 no. It's will I get it right? And what is right or wrong? I mean, it's a gradient, right? It's not binary.
Mm.
And we, as
Yeah.
educators, we hold that space for people to step into. Sorry, go on.
No, great example. Love it. Love it.
Yeah. Um, let's jump into.
Yeah,
How,
if I may, I just want to say like that when
mhm.
I was rereading again this chapter, it spoke to me at a personal level as well.
Talk to me.
This idea of old ideas with new perspective, old
Okay.
ideas with new perspective. And I find that in my work, especially when I'm in a mode where I'm really in delivery mode, and this last couple of months have been like that. Like it's, training, and then one training ends and a new one starts, and it's the same material, but it's a new group, it's a new set of people, right? They're coming in with new perspectives and everything. And I feel like I don't do very well when I get into repetition, and sometimes it feels like, you know it can start to feel repetitive until I remind myself that every experience is going to be so different. The material might be more or less the same, but the what is going to come through in the training is going to be so unique and so different because of the new group, right? And the new perspectives that people bring and how it lands with people. And so that is one way in which things remain fresh. Old ideas, if you like, continually have fresh perspective. I don't know if you can relate to that as well. Like that, it really is a mindset, right? That if you get tied to just delivering something in a repetitive mode, it gets
Mhm.
old and stale very quickly. And very quickly we feel like, I don't really want this anymore, because we sort of yearn for novelty. But if we bring a fresh spirit to something that is familiar, then that familiar feels fresh too. It continues to feel fresh.
Yeah. One coaching practice is to say, look around the room and find something that's new in the room. Even though you've sat in that same office, I've seen you in that same office for the past 2 years.
Mm,
There's something that you've not brought your awareness to in that office
mm,
before.
mm,
And Heracles comes a line, no person steps into the same river twice, for by the time you take in the second step, both the person and the river have changed. There's always something new and fresh.
mm.
Always. Yeah.
What a beautiful quote. Yeah, that's so nice.
Hey. That said, let's go into this piece right here.
Yeah.
Reframing failure in life and in education. So Professor Amar recognizes Kenna from his failed filtration device. And the way Professor Amar brings it up, again, he's not the source of threat, but rather he sees it and says, I saw that. And he says, that's a real character building moment.
Mm,
You had a moment of that
mm,
this week that you posted on LinkedIn. And for those people who want to see it, they can go see it. But if you could briefly tell us about it, and then we'll discuss how we can bring this into education and into our lives.
mm. Yeah, the parallel is pretty fascinating. So, so what happened to me is I basically drew a blank during a talk that I was giving, and it was quite an embarrassing moment. I just lost complete thread of what I wanted to share, the story, everything, and it kept my mind very busy for a day or two, trying to figure out what happened, and I wanted to justify it. I wanted to make sense of it. I wanted to sort of reason myself out of it. And what happened was, of course, that doesn't lead to anything. It's just a mental game, and it doesn't lead to any breakthrough. Um, and the breakthrough only happens when we start to pay attention to what is this quote unquote failure setting me up for. What is the learning in it? What am I being shown, right? The learning in it. And that actually, once I started to ask that question, the insights were flowing very quickly. It was like really quickly I started to grasp what this was really about. And it opened up a number of things, like, you know, a conversation with my son that I would not have had
Yeah,
otherwise,
I love that.
right? And it was a very profound and important moment of connection that came just because of that situation.
Hmm.
And the other, really important learning was that there was a new story that was coming out of this sort of breaking down. There was a new story, and that new story had potential in it.
Hmm.
And I seized that opportunity, and then stood up again and did a talk around that news story, and
Yeah.
which was really about the lessons. And so there's a and that then kind of got me back into, yeah, this is what it's all about, right? This is all what it'll get you get knocked down, you stand up again, and
I get knocked down.
yeah, you find the beauty in it. um,
Hmm.
and then of course sharing it, right? Like, not kind of showing a bit of vulnerability and just putting it out there. There's something healing, I think, in that as well. It becomes real, and it allows other people to also step into their vulnerability. So there's many sort of potential ripples, I think, from this type of approach. And I think what's happening to Kenna is not that different.
Mm, mm. Yeah. Two things I want to point out there. One is, okay, yeah, you made the failure. Failure. What is failure, right? You didn't achieve what you wanted, but you made the effort. And that's what we're
Hmm.
looking at. That's what we talked about before. The thing I want to point out is being witnessed from the outside in. In both sense, Amar witnessing Kenna and your son witnessing you.
Mm.
And it's like Yeah, other people saw it. It's okay, and it opened up the conversation for connection.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, owning the failure, you can't disown it. So it's just like, yeah, it happened, and then you got curious to say, what does this mean? And you were, I would use the word humble enough to explore it with curiosity and alchemize it into saying, oh yeah, how is this serving me? I think
Mm,
that is such a wonderful gift to give your son, that perspective. I mean,
mm,
life gave it to you and then you pass it on to your son. But I absolutely loved that. Yeah.
mm. Thank you.
So
Yeah, it feels
go
like
on.
alchemy. It does. It does feel like alchemy.
Well,
Yeah, turning
I'm
dirt to gold, right? There was gold in
mm,
it for sure. Yeah.
there's a quote, it's a paraphrase of Marcus Aurelius that I say it's life happens and we give it meaning. You get to choose, eh? You get to choose a
Mm,
perspective. And when we have conversations like this, when we align ourselves with people who see in that perspective of, hey, what's in this? You are aligning with people who are creating, who are bringing forth something awesome. Yeah.
mm.
And then the question is, how might our educational approach change if we viewed failures as essential components, like they are needed of learning rather than something to be avoided? It is essential. I mean, yeah, go on.
Well, my mind goes straight to grading, right? Because grading is it's like the most extreme form of success and failure, right? And
Talk to me. Yeah, this is a nuanced conversation. What's up? Where are you going with this?
well, no, actually, now that I've said it, your question was, what role does learning from failures play in education? And going back to the grading, like, you know,
Hmm.
failing a class, for example, can be a
Hmm.
failure, but then it's how do you go about responding to that, working with that, that I feel is a really important part of the education process, right? So having conversations around these types of topics like would be powerful. Um, does Kenna have any way to process what happened with this engineering project other than trying to figure out it in his own head, which can be very, very difficult to do? But if there was a space for him, for others like that, to be able to work through it and to find that meaning in it, to find the gold in it, then that process of growth and learning will accelerate greatly, right? It might still happen without that, but it will take longer, be more painful, less enjoyable, or it might not even happen. It might just get like pushed away,
Mm,
and
metastasize.
and it will surface some later, years later, somewhere again. It'll pop up, and at some point, probably, you need to look at it, right? Face it,
Mm.
work with it.
Yeah, yeah. So when I said this is a nuanced subject, there in education there's a conversation: are grades needed or not, right?
Mhm.
And the question was, what if we view failure as an essential part of
Mhm.
education? If we have failure, I think what we also need is feedback. And
Mm.
as an exterior person taking observation and say, oh yeah, this is the grade that you received. What is a feedback on that? Whereas we focus on behavior for the next point.
Mhm.
I would always tell my students, hey, a grade is a snapshot. It's a moment in time. And because I believe in your growth and I know your growth and I know it's possible, here's the behavior. And I'm sharing this with you because I know
Mm.
you can get better. What you do with it is up to you. But that said, I abhor grades. I really don't like grades, yet I also see
Mm.
I see how they can be serving. It's just the
Mm,
narrative that we have around them,
yeah,
or most people have around them. Yeah.
yeah. I think that's so important, right? Because
What's that?
well, the narrative around it, because
Mm,
we take it personally often, right? I think that's unfortunately what happens is that if you fail an exam, there's a sense of like I'm a failure, right? It extends into what you start to believe about yourself. It can easily extend there.
but
Um, no, yeah.
no, no, it does. It does. Finish your idea. Yeah.
So that's I think where the watch out is, and that's where I feel like the that the power of the conversation has to take place, and that there's a distinction that's made between the grade and what it says about the person's capacity for this particular topic at the moment and what
Hmm.
they can learn from that, and the individual who they are as a human being and their potential and what they're capable of. You know that these are two different things,
Yeah.
and what happens is they often get mixed up, and I think that messiness is it can have counter effects, right? It could actually make somebody less open to learning if they get shut down, right? If they start to think of themselves as I'm not good at this because I failed, that class, I'm not good at it. So it will shut them down to even consider the possibility that they could continue to learn along that line of development.
Yeah.
And then it has
It,
a counter, it has sort of the opposite effect that you want to have.
it comes back to one of the principles of being at full potential, as I've read on your site, of understanding the person is in the fullness to
Yeah.
expand into that potential. And that grade is a marker of your behavior at that, not behavior, but your ability. And that's a skill.
Mm,
A skill is not your being.
mm,
Your being is at fullness. It's beautiful. It is to flourish and to express. But then that skill, this is just a moment. And your skill
mm,
is not your being.
mm,
Yeah.
mm.
Boom. Um,
And it wouldn't be that difficult for a professor or for a school to embrace that concept, right? And to clearly sort of have that as their vision for education, right? That it feels like it's very core, but to be able to clearly state that we are not our grades, something like that, right? That there's that we look at each student as whole and already fully capable, and that grades are just snapshots. It just tells us where are we at, along that path of development. Um, so I do think it's actually not that difficult of a thing to embrace if you're clear about it, right? And if it's communicated clearly, and if the professors and the teachers are proactively communicating that, then it becomes quite easy, I think, for students to yeah to to parse these things, to separate them.
yeah. There are those schools of philosophy, the Waldorf school, the Montessori school. There are people who are approaching education as such. And I think in the new age of AI, there will be more space for that because people will see these old institutes having to reimagine education.
Yep.
Hey, somebody should write a book about that, right?
Education re-enlightened. Why not? Yeah. Reimagine.
Yeah. Um, this has been a wonderful conversation.
Yeah.
How about we do it in another week's time, and hopefully I will have my own physical copy to share with the world, share with the
We
broader
will.
audience.
Yeah, this is very enjoyable. I love where it takes us, and how each chapter holds so many beautiful nuggets of wisdom that can be unpacked like this. And
Mm,
thanks, Marcus, for the preparation you put into this and picking out some of the sections. If you allow me, I
mhm.
would like to just read a short part as well.
Please. Yeah, no, this is
Um,
collaboration. This is our.
so this is one that stood out for me,
Yeah.
and it's Professor Amar giving a little bit of his vision of macroeconomics. So after he's had that interaction with the students, he's sort of putting forward, I guess, a bit of a new paradigm. So he says, for example, Professor Amar continued, when we talk about supply and demand, we're assuming that scarcity and competition are innate facts of life. But are they? Is it possible that we are entering a new age of abundance? And if so, how would it change the way we think about human needs and resource allocation? He gazed around the room, making eye contact with students as he posed the question. Some of them seemingly skeptical. Some of them seemed skeptical, but Kenna found himself sitting forward, suddenly invested in this line of discussion. He had never considered challenging foundational economic assumptions before. Yeah. So I think it's beautiful that challenging of assumptions, when the landscape, when the macro environment changes, like, then some of our assumptions need to evolve as well. And I love how Professor Amar is bringing that in, not as a new fact, not as something that is written in stone, but at least as an openness for exploration, for conversation, for discussion with the students.
You're absolutely right. If you will, he's planting seeds of curiosity. And he's not leading their thoughts. He's just saying, and he's inviting their thoughts, if anything.
Yep.
Yeah. And then, sorry, when he asked them to do an assignment, and the girl says, "Is this going to be graded?"
Yeah.
And then the amicable Professor Amar, he then turns very silent and just looks at her.
Yeah, he doesn't really answer her, does he?
He answers her in silence. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Very subtle.
All right.
Beautiful.
So,
thank you so much, my friend.
Yeah, thank you. Next week we're talking about chapter
5.
Five. Yes. This is when Professor Amar has his own discussion to the whole student body, if you will. Correct.
Yeah.
We'll get there.
Yeah. It'll all come back. Yeah.
All right, Mark. It's been wonderful,
Take
bit
care.
by bit, step by step. Be well.
Yeah.
All those watching in the replay, thank you for joining us.